welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of South Carolina.
This is Rogers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rogers scores! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivers for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick plays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into Gamecock Pod Live for May the 3rd, episode number 1215 of Gamecock Pod Daily and Gamecock Pod Live as I adjust my microphone here. Let's jump right into our Nana's Porch news, notes, and headlines brought to you by Nana's Porch. Nana's Porch is a full-service catering company servicing the greater Charlotte area, whether it is a banquet, a wedding, a corporate event, or just a big backyard bash or a watch party with the full hog barbecue. Nana's Porch has got you covered. Maybe you're having a corporate event where you're bringing in some food trucks or food trailers. Maybe it's a little league event where you're treating your team after their season. It's that time of year. Nana's Porch voted top 3 in food trailers by the local newspaper poll in Charlotte, and their pimento cheese, good, voted numero uno, number 1 by the North Carolina Specialty Foods Association in the meat and cheese category. Check them out at nanasporch.com. That's NANASPORCH.com. Support this Gamecock owned and operated business. You'll love it. I guarantee it. All right. Shane Beamer yesterday made the hiring of new defensive tackles coach Travian Robertson official at a 5 p.m. press conference. More on that in just a few minutes with our special guest, Mike Uva from GamecockCentral.com. A little background. When I worked for GamecockCentral.com, I was at the library at Scotland County High School in Laurinburg, North Carolina, when Travian Robertson announced his decision for South Carolina. Got to interview him, his high school coach, Mark Barnes, and meet his family. And my good friend, Brad Lawing, who recruited and coached Travian Robertson and has served as a mentor along the way. If you're not a patron, that podcast yesterday, the interview with Brad Lawing, that is worth 1 month subscription in and of itself. All right, Shane Beamer also gave us the expected bad news that Jalen Nichols, starting left tackle, his knee injury during the spring game was significant. From everything I've been told, it's very doubtful Nichols will be able to play this season. If it is it may not be until the bowl game. So South Carolina will enter fall camp with Ja'Kai Moore slotted. At least he will open camp as the number 1 left tackle. All right, Lamont Paris and company yesterday made the signing of 6'8", 245-pound forward B.J. Mack. Official, Mack, one of the most highly coveted prospects in the transfer portal, had over 20 offers, made official visits to Alabama, who was the number 1 overall seed in the NCAA tournament, LSU, Iowa, South Carolina, and was scheduled to visit Arkansas, and Eric Musselman canceled that visit and chose Lamont Paris and the Gamecocks. Gamecocks also filled out their roster with 6'4" guard Morris Ugatsut, a native of Finland. He was slated for the 2024 class. He will reclassify and enroll this summer at South Carolina. That gives the Gamecocks 13 players, but Ugatsut is expected to redshirt, meaning 12 players will play this season. More on that with Mike Uva. I love what Lamont Paris has done in the transfer portal, no doubt about it. Gamecock Baseball will play 7 of their next 8 games on the road. That begins tonight at Winthrop, 6 p.m. start time. First pitch, Gamecocks will roll out Eli Jones, who is 4-2 on the season with a 3.06 ERA. 40 strikeouts, 9 base on balls in 35.1 innings pitched. Then the team will travel to Kentucky for a pivotal 3-game SEC series before returning home next week for a midweek home game with North Florida. Then they'll get right back on the road and travel to Arkansas before coming back home to finish the season against Tennessee. Gamecocks are currently 35-8, 14-6 in the SEC, number 3 in the polls, number 2 in the RPI. All right, the Welcome Home Tour begins tonight in Charlotte at the Charlotte Country Club. The doors open at 6 p.m. Tickets slated for $90 a piece. Those are some expensive tickets. All right, we will be back with Mike Uva after this commercial message.
If you enjoy listening and watching the free Wednesday show, now live streaming on YouTube, and would love more Gamecock Pod daily, join our growing Gamecock family by becoming a monthly or annual subscriber. You'll be able to listen to the show every day of the week and listen to guests like J.C. Sherbert, Hale McGranahan, and John Whittle from thebigspur.com, Colin Taylor and Mike Uva from Gamecock Central, Emily Adams from the Greenville News, Ben Portnoy, Michael Lanana, and Jeremiah Holloway from GoGamecocks.com, Michael W. Bratton, the host of That SEC podcast, and many, many more. As a VIP subscriber, you can join or listen to the weekly live Zoom call with up to 100 of your favorite Gamecocks and friends. After the show is an unrecorded overtime segment where the real scoop gets dropped and discussed. It's like going down to your local pub or sports bar and having a conversation with your Gamecock friends about last week's football game, men's and women's basketball games, and Gamecock Baseball. And of course, there's always recruiting to discuss. In addition to the weekly Zoom call, VIP subscribers get the most popular podcast, The Morning After, which is released every Sunday morning during football season, and more VIP perks are in the works. Follow Keith on Twitter at KAllset, or follow the show on Twitter at GamecockPod. Go to the top of the homepage and follow the link. If all else fails, go to patreon.com/GamecockPodDaily. Join now and get up to 3 months free off an annual VIP subscription. You will love it, guaranteed. Now, back to Gamecock Pod Live.
All right, welcome back in to Gamecock Pod Live. And last night, we convened for the Garnet and Black Town Hall, which is our weekly Zoom meeting. And we had about 75 people in the room. And just a great meeting. It was Travian Robertson week. And we talked a lot about that, a lot about Gamecock Baseball. A lot about Travian Robertson, his time at South Carolina as a player, his coaching career. And if you have not seen the press conference, it is must-see Gamecock TV. Travian just talking about the Gamecocks, talking about how everything Brad Lawing told him would happen to him, happened to him at South Carolina. He became a great player. He met his wife. He met the guy that was his best man at his wedding. He even had his wedding in the Horseshoe. His first son was born at South Carolina. His wife, Kiki, an SEC track champion. Travian, an integral part of the South Carolina team that won the SEC East in 2010 and played for an SEC championship. Got his degree, which was important to him and his family, made the SEC honor roll, was a team captain, and was drafted and played in the NFL. So let's bring in our special guest, Mike Uva, from GamecockCentral.com. You guys go ahead and jump in the Nana's Porch chat box. Leave your questions for Mike or myself. I mean, you can leave questions for somebody else and I'll pass them along, but you probably got the best shot of getting them answered if it's for me and Mike. And Mike, as I bring you in, I have to say, it's not been a pleasant experience for the Boston sports teams that are near and dear to our hearts. The Bruins up 3-1 after being the #1 seed, having the best record in the NHL, having a prolific season, 65 wins, blow a 3-1 lead against Florida, and they were up 3-2 with under a minute to go in Game 7. Choke it off, they go to overtime, and predictably they lose. And then Monday night, the Celtics, the highest-ranked team left in the NBA with home court advantage throughout the playoffs, get Philly minus the NBA's MVP, Joel Embiid. I knew when he didn't play, they were going to blow that game. I mean, let's face it. The Celtics have the worst coach in the National Basketball Association. I just call him Clueless Joe. And they play no defense. James Harden, a former shell of himself, goes off for 45. The Celtics are down 1-0 and or to nothing, and now tonight Joel Embiid is back. Talk me off the ledge with the Celtics.
It's game 2 tonight. That's all I got. Game 2 tonight. Got to flush it. Got to move on. It was a crappy less than 24 hours at the TD Garden from Sunday into Monday for us Boston fans. We're celebrating walk-off home runs by the Red Sox on May 1st. That was the only thing that helped me stay off the cliff on Monday night. So, yeah, I mean, look, I think this team has the talent. Mazzulo, I'm not sold on him yet as a coach. I think there's, and you see it in even college basketball. There's a lot of talented teams out there, and you have coaches that just can't coach. When it comes to tight games, when the situation just, you need a coach to be able to change things up, whether it be X's and O's or just call up a play, when to use a timeout. So it wasn't a good night, but bounce back. Good opportunity tonight at home. You have to win this one, especially if Embiid's back in the lineup, as it looks like it will be the case tonight.
So can I just be controversial here for a minute before we get into the Gamecocks? I mean, it is my show, but I have to say, the Boston Celtics should not have fired Ime Udoka for having a consensual relationship with a Celtics employee. And they try to hang it on the fact that he said something to her that was offensive prior to them having a sexual relationship. And my point is, if she really found it that offensive, why did she then have a sexual relationship with this guy? A suspension, 20 games. Without pay, a fine, sure. But they tried to tarnish his reputation with this. And, well, I'm just not going to go there with what I think about the exact reason why it happened. But let's face it, where it happened, a very racially divided city historically in Boston. And
I mean, that has nothing to do with it, Keith.
They crapped the bed with this.
But Keith, race had nothing to do with this. I mean, they just brought in another black man. I mean, this has nothing to do with race. I mean, come on. Come on. I mean,
if Brad Stevens would have been the coach and done that, I do not think he would have been fired.
And everything you're saying is alleged, by the way, because nothing has been actually proven or out there from the Celtics standpoint. I will say this, though, regardless of the situation, regardless of the details, which, again, a lot of it hasn't come out from the Celtics or the NBA because a lot of it is a personal matter, right? And I agree with you. If there's certain things, the problem is this. If there was something in his contract, in the way that – I will say that. I will agree with you with this. The way the Celtics handled the whole situation – came across it smelled, it reeked. If he had done something where it was in his contract that he had broke, right, that he had agreed on, right, you have a certain role, you understand things, then now it is a personal matter. I agree with you on that. The problem is, though, if that was broken, if that was in the contract, you can't do it. I mean, that's just like, I don't want to make comparisons to bring people's names in, but like if you're the head coach of a college football team and you're sleeping with a recruiter, you know what I mean? It's just that there's certain things that you can't have in your organization. I don't agree with you as far as if it had happened to Brad Stevens. I think he would have been in the same situation. I think he would have been out. We can agree to disagree with that, but I don't think it had anything to do with race, especially when you brought another African-American in as a head coach.
I mean, to me, if you were going to get rid of him, why not bring in Quinn Snyder? I mean, he was available. I mean, you have the best roster in the NBA, and you turned it over to a guy with
a young kid.
I mean, even Damon Stoudemire, who was on that staff, eminently more qualified to me to be the head coach. But I mean, I don't make the decisions. Brad Stevens makes the decisions. You know, I think if Boston does not win a championship, the people that made those decisions should be held accountable. They have the best roster in the NBA. They have two budding superstars. I'm not so sure Jaylen Brown may not be the star of the Celtics, even though Jason Tatum gets all the credit. When it's crunch time, Brown gets it done. And I just think the whole thing's unfortunate. I'm not a Red Sox fan. I mean, I am, particularly when they play the Spankies of New York. But my Atlanta Braves are 20-10 and just continue to do what they do, which is beat the New York Mets 2 out of 3 this past weekend, week, because it ended on Monday. But it's an unfortunate situation for all parties with the Celtics, and hopefully something changes. All right, so hey, it's Travian Robertson week.
Mm-hmm.
I know you were at the press conference, so let me blow your mind here. When Travian Robertson announced his decision in the library at Scotland County High School, I was there. And do you know who I was covering that announcement for? GamecockCentral.com.
How about that? How about that?
And so just your impressions of the press conference. Seemed to me Shane Beamer again was pretty ticked off that a member of his staff chose to leave. But I will agree that, in my opinion, and in the opinion of others, this is a major upgrade for South Carolina.
Well, you know, time will tell. Time will tell if that is the case. I feel like it is. It makes Gamecock fans feel good about the hire because of Robertson's background, right? He is a former Gamecock player, played in the NFL. He was a phenomenal captain, and he was very, very critical to that 2010 team that went to the SEC championship and won the SEC East. So I feel like those things in the short term, as South Carolina moves on from Jimmy Lindsey, who I can't blame. He was going to get paid. Ben Portnoy put it out. He was going to get paid $475,000 from South Carolina this upcoming year. LSU comes in. And by the way, Brian Kelly reaches out to Shane Beamer, which it's one of those small things. And no one's asking, you know, for people to be throwing Brian Kelly a parade for doing that. But in this day and age, we see it so many times where coaches will just, you know, poach other coaches from other universities, and they don't even do the common decency thing of reaching out. So I give Brian Kelly credit for that. And this was, as of yesterday, Beamer said it was 12 days ago. So 13 days ago that had happened. And about a week later, that's when things really start to pick up. And Lindsey ends up going over there. $750,000 is what LSU will be paying him. And on top of that, LSU will be buying out the remainder of his contract at South Carolina for $300,000, according to The Athletic. So I bring those things up because you move on from Lindsey. Okay, who can you bring in right now? And right now, I mean, it's a tough time to be replacing a coach. You know, you're just finishing up spring football. The transfer portal, yes, it is closed, but these next couple weeks, you're hoping to potentially sign a guy or two. Recruiting is going to start to pick up in the next month. Coaches are out there on the recruiting trail. It's not ideal, as Beamer pointed out. But you have a guy that comes in here who is a young guy, again, NFL ties, understands the expectations for this program, and has been paying attention to it the best he can and could have the last couple of years. I feel like it is a home run hire. And if things play out from a statistical standpoint and South Carolina is able to improve on the run defense and just little things like that, we're going to look back on this hire and say, man, it was a home run hire, the feel at the time, but now we can say it was an absolute home run. And especially if he can continue to do some things that we've seen with the other coaches on this staff, which is recruit at a high level. And I feel like from just listening to him, man, how can't you like this guy? I feel like he's going to be someone that can go into a living room. He's going to be able to win over the parents. He's going to be able to win over the recruit because he's going to be authentic. And I think that's the biggest thing you need right now in recruiting, because you can read BS. You can smell crap now more than ever. These kids understand it. They're around it more because they see social media. They understand when they are around someone that's just feeding them crap. I think Robertson's going to be a phenomenal recruiter for South Carolina.
I mean, Mike, I couldn't agree more. I mean, when you look at it, Travian Robertson was a top 50 national recruit, okay, from the state of North Carolina, NC State, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, Clemson, Florida State, you name it in the SEC footprint. They all wanted this guy. They fervently recruited him. So he's been through the process as a big-time recruit, number one. Okay, so he understands that process. Coincidentally, that recruiting battle came down to South Carolina and Clemson. The relationship with Brad Loeing was critical. They are still close to this day. Again, had about a 45-minute interview with Brad Loeing on yesterday's pod. If you're not a patron, sign up just for that. It's worth it. I guarantee it. Brad Loeing with great insights on Travian Robertson. I mean, we talked about the 17-year-old Travian Robertson, the 18-year-old true freshman Travian Robertson, who was one of the first guys, his class, to be able to enroll early in college. And so when he came to college, he was still a high school senior. He transitioned from defensive end to defensive tackle, became an all-SEC player, helped lead South Carolina to the SEC championship game, was a captain, SEC honor roll, an NFL draft pick. And now you look at every place he's been, there's been an immediate turnaround in the production of the defensive line, from Georgia State, where he made Jordan Strong the sack leader in FBS in 2020. The next year, after Jordan Strong had transferred to South Carolina, Georgia State broke the school record for sacks. Tulane was 2-10. Back in the day, we used to call it Tulane and 10. They're 12-2, the American Athletic Champion. They beat Kansas State, who, by the way, won the Big 12. They beat TCU, who was in the college football playoff, in that championship game. And Kansas State's coach in the AP article commented that they lost that game because Tulane's defensive front dominated them physically. And then, by the way, they beat this team from the West Coast with the Heisman Trophy winner, Southern Cal, in the Cotton Bowl. And the final two plays of the game were sacks on the Heisman Trophy winner. And, Mike, you look at the group he's inheriting: Tonka Hemingway, Boogie Huntley, TJ Sanders, Nick Barrett, Xavier McLeod, who quite frankly may have been the top XXL defensive lineman in the country, 6'5", 325. There's a reason Kirby Smart and Will Muschamp recruited the hell out of him. And there's some other young guys down there as well. And I talked to Brad about it yesterday, and certainly he's inheriting, Travian is, a much better defensive front than Brad Loeing did in 2006 when he came back. The first thing he told me was, hey, we have to change the DNA of our room. And he did that with Cliff Matthews, Travian Robertson, Lottie Ajaboy, Melvin Ingram, Devin Taylor, and there was this guy named Clowney as well.
It's going to be exciting. It's going to be exciting to watch how these players are developed under Robertson. And that doesn't take anything away from what Jimmy Lindsay was able to do. And I bring that up just because I think back to this past weekend and the number of players that we saw with South Carolina get drafted. Actually, it was the most that they've had drafted in a decade, to have 5 players drafted. So I bring that up just because, Will Muschamp did a great job of identifying talent. And there were times where you had skill players. You had, I felt like, more skill players than anything else. But you did have some players in the trenches. But you had skill players that really stood out. Why it didn't work here when Muschamp was here, that's a story for another day. But I bring that up because what we've seen is guys that came in during that Muschamp era, which are slowly starting to thin out, okay? You're not going to have as many Muschamp guys here in the next year or two. We've seen those guys go on to the NFL. There's a lot of guys, Cam Smith, Zach Pickett's, we expected that to happen. We've seen other guys continue to develop with the coaching, whether it be, from a Jimmy Lindsay or a Torian Gray. So I'm bringing all those other coaches into it because what Beamer has done is he's found a lot of coaches to be able to develop other players here, okay? Guys that were part of that Muschamp regime. You look back, how does this all kind of go together? Well, now we look at the defensive line. Jimmy Lindsay's gone. You have some of those players there, a Boogie Huntley, some of these guys who were brought in during the Muschamp era. And some of them, like Buggy, right? He's gone through injuries, but they have talent there. What can a year working with Robertson do for their stock, right? And you think of these little things, and I really think over the next couple of years, we're really going to be able to see what Robertson did more than anything because, again, Muschamp guys, they're going to be on their way out over the next year or two, and you're going to see some of these young guys. You met Xavier McLeod. You have young guys here who are still being shaped, who are still being molded. So reason I went on that kind of that full circle look at it is Robertson has a really, really unique opportunity to show us how talented he is as a coach. Obviously, we mentioned about recruiting. That's an important part of it as well. But I think he's really going to be able to show us how talented he is as a coach if these guys are able to take that next step. Just because, again, some of these guys, they just haven't been as consistent for one reason or another. Injuries played a part of that. Boogie's going to have a tremendous opportunity this season. And if he is able to take that next step, that's not to take anything away from Jimmy Lindsay or the coaches before him, but I think a lot of it will have to do with how Robertson's able to get the most out of him.
I agree. And that's one of the traits of Brad Lawing that he instilled in Travian Robertson. Travian even mentioned at the press conference, he still has his notes from every defensive line meeting at South Carolina. Not only that, he does the same drills. Brad Lawing gave him his cut-up practice tape. They watched it. He's like, oh, coach, I got all of that written down. That's what I do. I do everything we did. And so I can tell you what, and practices aren't open anymore. But when Spurrier was there, when Lawing was there, a lot of practices were open. I've known Brad Lawing for over 30 years, back to when I was in my 20s and had a full head of hair almost, and no wrinkles on my face. And these guys are in for an awakening with Travian Robertson because there's not going to be standing around and talking during individual periods. It is going to be rep maximization. Guys are going to be pushed. They are going to be expected to go full speed on every rep and to be perfect in every rep. And they won't get out of that drill until they do it the way he wants it done. And I think that has been, whether it's at Albany State with Corey Peoples or at Georgia State with Sean Elliott, the second time, first as a GA, then as a full-time defensive line coach, or at Tulane. That's the secret sauce with Travian Robertson. He was coached by an old school guy. He's taken all of that, put his personality in it. I mean, let's face it, he's an imposing guy. He looks like he could go out and play nose guard right now. He looks like he could go in the weight room and still throw up 400 pounds with ease on the bench press. But he's 34 years old. I don't think South Carolina's ever gotten a guy like this on the way up in his prime, like Travian Robertson. And he met his wife, Kiki, who was an SEC track champion for Curtis Fry and the women's track team at South Carolina, had his first son, got married in the Horseshoe. And just like me, one of his favorite places, Andy's Deli. God bless Andy, God rest his soul. But I just think that, like we saw flashes from Zach Pickens, who was a 5-star guy. A lot of people thought he should have been a first-round pick, but we didn't see the maximization, perhaps, of his talent. I think, and like no slight on Jimmy Lindsey, because he rebuilt those guys' confidence after Tracy Rocker left because of the toxic culture on defense and the tearing down of players. It was absolutely critical for a guy like Jimmy Lindsey, who loved those guys up, who restored confidence, who coached them and developed them. But I think we're going to see just what we've seen at Georgia State and Tulane. I think we're going to see these guys go to a different level with Travian Robertson because that's his track record.
And the other thing, too, that's making this very unique is that you look at Sterling Lucas and just how young he is as well. It's not the exact same to say that an offensive coordinator needs to be in sync with his offensive line coach. It's not the exact same. But to be able to have an edge coach and a defensive tackle coach, to be able to have those guys on the same page, it can help your defensive line tremendously because there's a lot of stunts, there's a lot of twists, there's a lot of gap responsibilities. Everyone needs to obviously do their responsibility on defense. They have to do their 111th, as we would say back in college. But there's something to be said when you do have two coaches who probably think very similarly and have the same vision. And that's not to say that Jimmy Lindsey didn't have that same vision, but because of, again, how young they are, there's a lot of things that they were probably taught that they view the game in a certain manner because of how recent they are from being removed from playing it. And I think being able to have guys like that on your coaching staff, especially together, not only will it help you out there on the field, but I think if anything, defensive tackles, you could see them probably going into Sterling Lucas's office, asking him a question or two. I think the chemistry, it's going to help. It's the little things that you don't necessarily think about when you hire a coach. I think it's really going to bring that unit closer together. And again, heading into this season, there's been a real big emphasis, as we heard from the coaching staff. Jimmy Lindsey mentioned it. Clayton White mentioned it. The players mentioned it throughout the spring, how much they want to improve on stopping the run because it's been an issue for them. And I think this year going into it, making this move now as they add Robertson to the coaching staff, I think the timing could not have come any better because they're really going to be able to develop a strong nucleus, a strong core up front. It's not going to be easy. I don't want you to think it's going to just be, okay, automatic changes are coming. No. It's not going to be easy. But at the same time, too, if you're able to establish this foundation this year, man, I mean, shoot, 2 years from now is when I really think South Carolina is going to be on the up and up just because of how young they are. This is a great time to be able to develop that nucleus up front and to be able to create that foundation to make that improvement with stopping the run.
I mean, Mike, no doubt about it. I really think Sterling Lucas is becoming a star on the recruiting trail. And as a coach, look what he did with Gilbert Edmond and Jordan Birch last season. I do expect the Gamecocks to add a couple of very nice edge players here in the month of May from the transfer portal that will definitely provide depth. And I think the big key for Clayton White is they've got to improve that run defense. I mean, 198 yards per game is not going to cut it. Now, I'm not putting that all on Jimmy Lindsey because, quite frankly, South Carolina's linebacker play has not been the best. They've been limited athletically at the position. They've had key injuries. I've gotten very positive reports on Mo Kaba.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a healthy Mo Kaba, and the guy I'm hearing the most about, Grayson Pup Howard, if you get those two guys, and then your transfers and some of your other guys like a Stone Blanton, who took a big step in the spring, I think that will go a long way to helping South Carolina improve their run defense. They'll get David Spalding back healthy. There's a plethora of options at that nickelback position that are quality players, including a former five-star from Georgia, D'Angelo Gibbs. We didn't get to see him in the spring game. But I do think they have a recipe and the talent to definitely take a major step forward in improving the run defense this season. And to me, that's absolutely critical.
And it's going to be something that, again, going into the season, regardless if Lindsey was going to be back with the coaching staff or not, there was going to be a lot of eyeballs on. And I think going into this season, there's going to be even more on there. So if they don't make the improvements that they need to up front, does that mean this hire is a failure? No, because, again, it wasn't just going to happen overnight. They have done a great job with recruiting, and that's going to help over the next couple of years. But I think the big thing is being able to have Robertson in here to be able to show them that vision. Because, again, you have so many young players. I understand there's some veterans back there, no question. But there's so many young, talented players across the board on this team. And I think the core of when we're talking about South Carolina football 2 years from now, those are the players that you need to really be able to take that next step. So to be able to develop a relationship with Robertson right now, hopefully it will lead you to that point. So when we're talking about USC football 2 years from now, we're able to say, man, we're not worried about the defensive line. You know, remember where they were 2 years ago? Remember the way we talked about the wide receiver room? I'd say towards the end of the Muschamp era. Shi Smith's last year. You take Shi Smith out of the equation, they had no other wide receivers left. They didn't. They had nothing left. So I bring that up just because the way we talk about USC's wide receiver room, that might be the same way we're able to talk about the defensive line. And they've had talented guys. I mean, we can go down the list of how many talented guys and how many guys they've produced in the NFL over just the last 3-4 years. But, again, that's all great, but you need to be able to take care of business when you're here. And that's going to be stopping the run this season and just making those improvements for the next couple of years with that foundation that we talked about.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. I mean, South Carolina, they actually did have wide receivers. They just didn't have anybody that could bring the ability out of them. They had Josh Vann. They had Jalen Brooks on that team.
They didn't do anything special, though. I mean, that's what I'm talking
about.
No, they didn't. They had names, but they didn't do anything. Like, if you took Shi Smith away, it was like, to make a basketball analogy, because I know you're a coach, it was like tying the right hand behind a 10-year-old and saying, use your left hand. They couldn't do anything, and that's why teams weren't worried about them throwing the ball. There was other issues, of course, with the musical chairs at quarterback that season, but yes.
But it took bringing in a guy like Justin Stepp.
Absolutely.
To maximize those guys' abilities. And to me, if Josh Vann doesn't suffer a major injury in that Clemson game, I think he's probably drafted, not signing as an undrafted free agent. Then you have 2 wide receivers drafted, right? I mean, certainly Juice Wells is going to be a draft pick next season. Potentially Xavier Legette if he has a big season. Coaching matters. I mean, you had a tight ends coach who was a quarterback coaching wide receivers that year. Prior to that, you had a running backs coach, Brian McClendon, coaching wide receivers. So bringing in a guy like Justin Stepp, I think Travian Robertson, I think Sterling Lucas fits that bill, certainly Torian Gray. And I think we'll see on offense with Dowell Loggins, bringing in a coach that can maximize your talent matters. And so I'm excited about it. And I think Lucas and Robertson could be a dynamic duo on the recruiting trail as well, double teaming guys like Dylan Stewart, Jordan Thomas from Don Bosco Prep up in New Jersey, who has South Carolina roots, as well as there's a plethora of defensive linemen in Georgia. South Carolina's in on 2 of the top defensive players in the state of Mississippi as well, thanks to Jody Wright and his connections there. And so there's a lot of exciting things happening at South Carolina, and just even as it relates to the defensive line and recruiting right now.
No question about it. And it's crazy to think. I mean, he just had his introductory press conference yesterday, and now he's already hitting the recruiting trails today out in the Atlanta area. So I'm excited to hear some of the feedback over the next couple of weeks, because the Welcome Home Tour, that's starting up this week. I think it actually starts today. So I'll be out towards that Aiken, Augusta area on Tuesday. We're going to be kind of breaking it up with Gamecock Central. I'll be out there, and by then, I'm sure we're going to already hear some reviews on how recruiting's going for Robertson. So I'm excited to hear what Beamer has to say.
Might even have a transfer portal defensive end commitment by then as well. So, Mike, let's change gears for just a few minutes before we wrap up and talk Gamecock men's basketball. Obviously, a very difficult season for Lamont Paris and staff. But this transfer portal class, culminating with the official signing yesterday of one of the most coveted players in the transfer portal, B.J. Mack, a native of Charlotte, who played for legendary coach Steve Smith at Oak Hill Academy. Spent most of his collegiate career at Wofford. But this is a guy that Alabama coveted, that LSU, that Arkansas, that, about 20 Power 5 schools offered. He visited Alabama, LSU, Iowa, South Carolina, Arkansas. Eric Musselman definitely wanted him to make that last visit there. He canceled. He chose South Carolina. And when you break down these guys in this transfer portal class, you got a 6'4" point guard, Talon Cooper, who was 6th in the NCAA in assists at over 6 per game at Minnesota. a Power 5 school. You got Miles Studi, a wing forward, who outside of the month of February this year was the leading three-point shooter in the SEC the past 2 seasons. Up until February, over 42%. The season before that, 43% three-point shooter. You add B.J. Mack at 6'8", 245. He can shoot the three. He can be a pick-and-roll guy, a pick-and-pop guy. He can play facing the basket or with his back to the basket. And then you add a combo forward from the Citadel, 6'9", Stephen Clark. You've got, according to ESPN anyway, a top 60 recruit coming in Colin Murray Boyle, 6'8" forward, a native of Columbia. This has got to be a much improved roster with Meechie Johnson coming back. Cooper could allow him to play off the ball more. Jacoby Wright, who was an outstanding three-point shooter and mid-range shooter playing off the ball. Josh Gray got a lot better. You get Ibrahim Adema back, who is coming off an injury, but a 6'6" guy that can play the point and play off the ball. Just your thoughts on what year 2 could look like for Lamont Paris and his staff.
I think the thing that excites me most about this team is that they actually have some depth. They have some depth. I mean, that wasn't the case last year. I mean, and I called it for what it was, which was you had G.G. Jackson and you had a bunch of SoCon talent that came on in. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I like the fact that Jacoby Wright, especially as the year went on, he improved. His confidence went up, and it improved from a shooting standpoint. You mentioned Meechie. Being able to have him come back, it's going to be able to add, again, not just depth, but someone that you could trust being out there on the court. And, I mean, we can keep going down the list here. Cooper, now you have a true point guard. I mean, there's just this team, and that's the beauty of the transfer portal, is that you can have a team one year, and, again, it's just G.G. Jackson and a bunch of SoCon talent, and then a year later, you're able to add so many more pieces, and it looks like an entirely different team. That's the good right now. We know that this can change quickly, though, right? I mean, this could be a year later, and, you know, the transfer portal gives, the transfer portal takes. It is your responsibility, if you're Lamont Paris and this coaching staff, to get the most out of this team to show that progress, right? I mean, that goes without saying. But you have to be able to do it, because when you go out to the transfer portal next year and you're trying to recruit guys in here, what's that pitch going to be? What's that pitch going to be? Well, you know what? Yeah, we weren't able to do things, but we can give you an opportunity to play here. You were able to show that, hey, despite some of the challenges that you guys had last year, you were able to, I mean, shoot, we can go down the list of how many more games they could have won. And I don't want to do the coulda, shoulda, wouldas, but for everything about this team that I just said, they could have easily won another 5 games. So, again, like we've seen with football with Shane Beamer, he's had success with the transfer portal. Well, he's also been able to say, hey, look what we did last year. Look what we did the year before that. We keep getting better. That's what you have to do this year for your Paris, because you need to. You need to continue to show progress. You need to continue to show that consistency, because if you don't, next year, 2 years from now, it becomes more difficult when you go into the transfer portal. I'm not saying they're going to have to bring in as many guys through the portal, but again, where South Carolina was a year ago compared to where they are now, they've done an outstanding job of taking advantage of the portal. No question about it.
I mean, to me, Mike, it's going to come down to winning close games. I mean, I'm very frank here. Lamont Paris and staff need to go and visit with some experienced Power 5 coaches about time and score situations, end of game situations, because there were, like you said, at least 5 games that if you handle it differently, you can win those games. And we're not going to relitigate it, but, I mean, Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, I mean, at Vanderbilt. I mean, there, or maybe it was Vanderbilt at home. I can't remember, but I mean, there were some of those games that Missouri, that South Carolina absolutely should have won and could have won those games. But they will be much more talented. They will be able to spread the floor, and teams will have to defend on the perimeter because of Cooper, Michie Johnson, Miles Studi, Jacoby Wright, and another guy that I expect to take a big step, who was a kind of a defensive guy when they went to the 1-3-1 and played at the top, Zachary Davis. I can't wait to see what he looks like next year. I mean, because he was a string bean, he's going to get bigger, but he's very skilled, and you just have to think, you know, Michie Johnson, Mike, last year is the first full season Michie Johnson has played since he was a sophomore in high school.
It's going to be exciting. And when we talk about what determines success, right? I'm not necessarily saying that this is a team that's going to make the tournament next year, but I think this will be the turnaround, how quickly the turnaround could be. I think that's what you have to realistically look at. And I think this is a team that has the ability to be able to turn things around and get another 6-7 wins. I mean, if not more. I don't think that is crazy to say. I mean, there could be a possibility that they were able to get that closer to 9. Just because of what we've talked about before, there were situations last year that they were close to winning some of those games. Now, of course, you're losing Gigi Jackson, and that's not easy to replace. For all the immaturity and the growth that he was going through at times throughout the course of the season, he still was your most productive player. That's not something that should be overlooked. But again, I think the thing that makes me believe that this team can be better, like I said, 5-6 games, realistically better, 7, wherever I said 6, is just because they have that depth. They didn't have that a year ago. If they got into foul trouble, they were screwed. They were screwed. And that's not to, call out guys on that bench, but I mean, let's just call it for what it is. Some of those guys had no business playing in the SEC. They didn't. I mean, that's just what it was. It was SoCon talent. It was SoCon talent. This is what the team was last year. And Paris did everything he could. And that coaching staff did everything they could to field a team. Well, that's not the case this year. And they've done a tremendous job through the portal to be able to fix some of that. But again, will it be enough? We're going to have to wait and see how that plays out in terms of what's that lineup look like? Who's the guy coming off the bench? But you have some talent. You have some talent this year.
I mean, to me, if they could make the NIT this year, then I think you can really sell the vision of taking the next step, just like he was able to do at Chattanooga. And with the transfer portal and with the players they brought in, there are going to be higher expectations. I think if they can make the NIT this coming season, I think that really, and he should have a lot of his high school recruiting class already signed even before the season starts. That's normally the way it works. I think this is going to be a big year for Lamont Paris and staff. All right, so Gamecock Baseball, Mike, coming off a 3-weekend stretch against 3 of the top 5 teams in the country. They go 5-3, but they get some injuries. They play Auburn. Braylon Wimmer gets injured. They lose 2 out of 3, mostly because I just think psychologically, emotionally, they were spent. but let's give Auburn credit. And South Carolina's pitching staff was not the best to start those games. Mark Kingston gets ejected on Sunday. He comes out to argue something different than the home plate umpire anticipated he was coming out to argue, and they run him. There's no appeals process. There's no way to rescind it. He's out of tonight's game against Winthrop. But this weekend, a pivotal 3-game series at Kentucky. Gamecocks will be down another man, Braylon Wimmer, out. What do the Gamecocks have to do to win that series at Kentucky?
Just got to flush it. You got to flush it. I mean, look, at some point they were going to hit a speed bump. And was it against Auburn? Not just against Auburn, but against Auburn at home. I don't think a lot of people expected that. But look, bottom line is this. That's just baseball. They were going to run into some type of speed bump at some point. So I think the big thing for this team now is you look ahead. You're approaching a very pivotal stretch here because everything you do these next couple weeks will dictate what that seeding will be. You know, while you still are in control of being able to host a regional, now you're looking at potentially, okay, look, if we finish strong, we have a chance to be able to potentially host a super regional, you know, if things play out. So that's what you're hoping for. You want to be able to put yourself in the best situation. And I think that's the big thing with South Carolina. Can you think about that stuff right now? Should you be thinking about that stuff right now? No, but it's in the back of your mind. You understand what you have to do. And after what took place this past weekend, it's just about being able to go back out there. You're obviously still banged up, right? I mean, injuries are a part of the game. Every team's dealing with some type of injuries. It seems like South Carolina, these last couple weeks in particular, they've really been hit by it. But this is a good opportunity for those younger guys, the guys that don't play as much, to be able to prove, hey, look, you know, if we're in a situation deep in the regular season or potentially as we head into postseason play, you can count on me. God forbid someone needs a day, whatever the case may be. So again, I know it's college baseball, and some college fans, they act like the world's coming to an end after a series loss. Where South Carolina is because of how hot they have started this season, the world's not coming to an end. Everything's okay, but they definitely need to be able to bounce back and take 2 of 3 this weekend. No question about it.
Yeah, so Matt, let's go to the Nana's Porch chat box. Ask, can LeCroy come back and play first? I think the latest information I had, Mike, maybe you've spoken to Colin, but I would say this weekend, if LeCroy comes back, probably DH is the best case scenario for him. I think it's going to be the same infield that you finished the Auburn series with after Braylon Wimmer went down. So that's going to move. Cassis will play first. We'll tip it at second. Braswell at short. And moves Cole Messina up to third base and Jonathan French behind the plate. I think that's what it's going to be this weekend. Hopefully against Kentucky, though, you get those guys back, or not Kentucky, Arkansas, because, at Arkansas and then closing out the SEC slate with Tennessee at home, those are going to be the 6 games that determine whether or not you're going to be a top 8 national seed, which I think is the goal. Overwinning the SEC, overwin the SEC tournament. If you're South Carolina right now, you're number 3 in the polls, you're number 2 in the RPI, you're the projected number 3 seed. To me, it's all about finishing in the top 8 so that you are playing in the friendly confines of Founders Park. You're sleeping in your bed every night. You're not having to travel. That gives you the cleanest and the easiest and most direct path to Omaha.
And I know maybe Kingston would disagree with me, and there could be some fans that would disagree with me. I'm sure some actually will agree. After being down here covering the Gamecocks over the last, 7-8 years, who the hell cares about the SEC tournament? Really? I'd rather them say, you know what, we're not even going to waste our time driving out there. Get healthy, number one. Number two, save your arms. There's the format for conference tournaments for baseball. It really makes zero sense to me. Really makes zero sense because you look at it, okay? Because of that quick turnaround, it really puts you at a disadvantage when you make a deep run. Now, I'm sure we could go down the list and we could find teams that have played in the, not just the SEC tournament championship game, but other conference tournament championship games, and they've made the College World Series. I'm sure there will be outliers, plenty of them. But, again, big picture, especially for a program that has won championships in baseball, does anyone really give two rats' asses about winning an SEC tournament championship in baseball? No.
Nope.
I mean, the regular season crown, that means something, I'd say. That means something. That's special. But it's that, and then it's being able to make it to Omaha. Like, if you had to give up one of those three, what do you think a lot of people are going to say? Oh, yeah, give me the SEC tournament champion. Throw that out. So, and I know it's easy to say that after South Carolina. It feels like they just have not had any success over the last, what feels like the last decade with the SEC tournament. It feels like they were always a one-and-done team or a two-and-done team over the last couple of years. But, look, I think South Carolina, like you said, Keith, you understand where you are right now. You don't want to put extra pressure on yourself, but you also understand how pivotal these next couple weekends are going to be, because if you are able to continue to take 2 of 3, you're going to put yourself in that class of being able to have a seed, which is in the top 8. And that's what South Carolina is aiming for right now, because you want to be able to host the Super Regional.
No doubt about it. Mike Uva with the last word on today's show. Mike, great stuff as always. Tell us what you've got coming up at GamecockCentral.com.
Well, we've been catching up with some of the commitments for the class of 2024 over the last couple of weeks. We'll continue to throw those on out there on Gamecock Central. You can check it out on GC and also on the Gamecock Central YouTube page, which is free if you have not subscribed today. Go on over there, subscribe, and hit that little alert button. Be able to get every update anytime we have a video. We threw a video out today with Robertson, the top 5 quotes he had from his press conference yesterday, at least the top 5 in my opinion, for what that's worth. So head on over there, check that out. You can also catch all our live shows as well there.
All right, Mike, I can't thank you enough. Always appreciate you being so generous with your time. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road. Hopefully a Celtics victory tonight.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Appreciate it.
All right. That was Mike Uva from GamecockCentral.com. Want to appreciate Jay Diz, Chris Payne, C-Note, and Matt for jumping in the Nana's Porch chat box today, and to Mike Uva for a fantastic show. As always, we will be back tomorrow for the Big Thursday show. We will be reviewing a lot of the Travian Robertson and Shane Beamer press conference. And then on Friday, on his drive to the Commonwealth of Kentucky, the Bluegrass State, John Whittle from thebigspur.com will be our Friday guest on Gamecock Pod Daily. So if you're watching live, or if you're watching this on the YouTube page, hit subscribe, hit the like button, sign up for alerts. We're live every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. So Thanks to special guest Mike Uva. Thanks to all of you guys in the Nana Sports chat box. So until tomorrow, this is Keith Alsep saying, God bless and go Gamecocks. I'm out of here.